In this segment, we want to talk about finishing the stabilized wood that we just turned. And there are really several ways you can go about it. One is that you simply sand it and let it go. This is going to produce a surface, depending on how high you sand it. This is sanded to about 600. That is rough, but is a great utility surface. So for the knife handles, for other things that you don't need an ultra high gloss finish on, sanding and no film finish is a good way to go. There are other ways to look at it depending on what you want to do with it. This sphere is stabilized big leaf maple, and I found that for something that's going to get handled like the sphere, but really doesn't need protection from anything except skin oils, sanding to about 5,000 grit with a sanding lubricant will give you a sufficiently glossy finish that you don't really need to do any more. The finish is never going to degrade, and when it starts to get a little oily looking, you just wipe it off with a soft cloth, and your shine is restored. Now, an alternative in the shiny finish is what's on this stopper. This is the stabilized spalted maple that we looked at earlier. This is sanded to about 5,000, but I've put an oil, shellac, and wax finish on this to give it a little bit more protection, because this is going to work in a more hazardous environment than is the sphere. This is going to be around liquids, around skin oils, spilled wine perhaps. So a little more protection of the surface is not a bad thing. All of these finishes start out the same way, and that's with sanding. I want to start out talking about sanding the stabilized wood at the very beginning. So, let me show you something you don't want to do. See that dust? That's something you don't want in your nose and you don't want in your lungs. Now, since I'm playing without a mask here today, I'm particularly sensitive to it. We get around that by using a sanding lubricant. Now, it's funny, you'd think that since the wood is plasticized, water would not affect it the same way it does unstabilized wood, but in fact it does. Water, even in stabilized wood, will raise the grain slightly. So as a sanding lubricant with stabilized wood, I use a walnut oil, the Doctor's Woodshop walnut finishing oil. And that's going to keep the dust out of the air, and more importantly, out of my nose. Like any other sanded wood, the sawdust gets trapped in the oil, and that makes a polishing compound. So all the advantages of the sanding lubricant that we have on unstabilized wood hold true with the stabilized wood. So nobody likes to sand and nobody likes to watch sanding. So we're going to speed things up here. I'm going to sand this through several grits to about 600 to show you what kind of surface we've gotten. I've sanded this up through 600 grit. I could go a lot further, but to make the point, the things I want to show you today, this is just fine. With a sanding lubricant, the last thing you have to do is get the surface clean before you do anything else with it. And that's just a matter of clean oil and a paper towel to scrub the surface. These are the Scotch shop towels. They seem to work a little bit better. They're softer, I think, than the kitchen variety paper towel. But they will tear away just as well, so you're not going to get your finger caught in it. So, let's see what we got here. You can see that this is now finished to the same state that the knife handle was. 600 grit, a waterproof surface, not a glassy finish, but a nice, tough, durable finish that you can use for many things. Now, we can just friction polish this a little bit to harden the oil on the surface, or we can move on and put another sort of finish on it. With the surface sanded to an acceptable level, and that acceptable level is whatever you decide it's going to be. This is done to 600. I first want to show you how to put on a friction polish. This would be for things like the pepper mills or the bottle stoppers, things that are going to get exposure to water, also exposure to the oils of the skin. Excuse me. Very simple finish to apply. It's called a friction polish because it needs the heat of the friction to dry the shellac, to melt the wax, and spread it evenly across the surface. And we only need about 3 coats. Actually, 3 coats of this is as much as you should ever apply. This is the walnut oil wax and shellac finish Pens Plus. And I'm feeling the heat coming through the paper towel pretty aggressively now. What we see there is we've got a nice, shiny, protected surface. Very simple one-step finish. The alternative to that would be to use a paste wax. And I'm going to use the Doctor's Woodshop walnut oil microcrystal paste wax. And we're going to apply that much the same way. So we take out the small amount on a paper towel. And again, the friction, the heat of the friction melts the wax, spreads it evenly across the surface. And we're going to let that cool for just a second and then go back and buff it up again. The advantage of the wax finish is for something that's going to be used a little more actively. It's much easier to restore. So there we've seen the 3 alternatives for finishing the stabilized woods. The friction polish, the walnut oil wax and shellac for the bright, shinier finish. The no finish at all in this segment for the most durable finish. And then finally, a little bit of extra protection using a paste wax to protect the surface. The finish you put onto your product, your project, is whatever you want. However you want it to look and whatever you think is the best finish for the application that you've made. So we take out the small amount on a paper towel. And again, the friction, the heat of the friction melts the wax, spreads it evenly across the surface. And we're going to let that cool for just a second and then go back and buff it up again. The advantage of the wax finish is for something that's going to be used a little more actively. It's much easier to restore. So there we've seen the 3 alternatives for finishing the stabilized woods. The friction polish, the walnut oil wax and shellac for the bright, shinier finish. The no finish at all in this segment for the most durable finish. And then finally, a little bit of extra protection using a paste wax to protect the surface. The finish you put onto your product, your project, is whatever you want, however you want it to look, and whatever you think is the best finish for the application that you've made.